Good morning. Welcome to Catskill Character. I'm your host, Donna Fellenberg. Joining me today is Erin, Scherer, host of Radio Catskill's Eating Upstate, which airs on Radio Catskill. Erin is also one of the hosts of Keep the Dream Flowing, a podcast devoted to the 1969 Woodstock Music Festival. She grew up in Penn Yan, New York, in Yates County on the north end of Cayuga Lake, one of the Finger Lakes, an area that I know absolutely nothing about, by the way. Nowadays, this area is becoming a tourist spot with many local breweries and Mennonite craft markets, and the fact that the village was awarded a $10 million downtown revitalization grant in 2018 speaks volumes. But Erin's experience there was quite different, which she will speak about, and she will also share with us her efforts to create a successful career as a filmmaker. Let's get to it. Welcome to Catskill Character, Erin. I can't tell you how happy I am to have you here, and aren't you glad you didn't have to drive to the studio?
Oh, yeah, I'm so glad. It's kind of a ways from where I live.
Yeah, how long does it take you to get down there?
I think it takes about 3.5 hours.
Ay. You originally lived in Penn Yan, New York.
Penn Yan, yeah.
Penn Yan. I have such a hard time pronouncing that for some reason. It was not a tourist spot when you were growing up there. I know the population was about 5,000. What was it like?
You know, the classic American small town in upstate New York. A little bit Mayberry, maybe a little bit Peyton Place sometimes. And like a lot of young people, I wanted to get out of there. And yes. I left at the earliest opportunity.
Well, you probably knew everybody in your graduating class in high school since, you'd all been together since grammar school. Was that a good thing or not such a great thing?
Like you said, I knew the majority of my classmates from third grade onward, Sometimes that was comforting and sometimes that was used against you.
I mean, in a small town like that, too, everybody kind of finds a way to know your business, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So you told me that while you were in high school, you were in the drama club and you worked on the school newspaper. What were your dreams for after high school?
I honestly wanted to go into show business. I think my family was kind of steering me a little bit more toward journalism because it was a little bit more practical. I applied to the film program at SUNY Purchase, but got turned down. I got accepted to SUNY Purchase, but I didn't get into the film program. But what I understand is that it is super competitive. So, maybe that was kind of a blessing in disguise,
So what did you do after high school?
I ended up enrolling, and eventually graduating from SUNY Oneonta. I went in as what was known at the time as mass communication. Nowadays, it's known as media studies. My sophomore year, I ended up switching to studio art and then graduated with what was called at the time a computer art degree. And that a few years ago was folded back into the art program, and now the major is called art and design.
We can see there that it took you a while to try to figure out, what's the best course of action for me here to get to New York City, because that's where you really wanted to be, right? New York City. So SUNY Oneonta, you got pretty far down, but not far enough. Let's hear about the various things that you did after you graduated in 2003.
Yeah, I, wrote screenplays. A couple of years after I graduated, I directed a documentary about downtown Binghamton, a little bit about its history and some renovations that were going on at the time. And I tried to submit it to the major festivals, but they said it was too local, so it didn't really get real far. I'm hoping to maybe at some point put that up on the internet.
And what else did you do?
So in 2007, I set up a YouTube channel. And, this was like the early days of YouTube. I think YouTube was only a couple of years old at this point. And I, had heard about people posting stuff on YouTube and going viral. So I decided to do that. And I put up a couple of videos that got traction. One of them was called Howl for Lindsay Lohan, which basically it was Allen Ginsberg's famous poem, and it was kind of tailored to some of the issues that Lindsay Lohan was going through at that
Oh,
point.
wow.
And then another one was called How Mumblecore Saved My Life. And so for those that are unfamiliar, mumblecore was a subgenre of indie film in early 2010s, teens, whatever. That was very low budget. Kind of what attracted to me was that, they were kind of like breaking these rules. They were improvising. It wasn't a conventional approach to filmmaking. And what ended up happening was someone had sent it to a guy by the name of Matt Dentler, who was running South by Southwest. And he was the one that was kind of programming these movies. And at the time, I had no idea this was coming and originating from there.
You did this film, this little film, How Mumblecore Saved My Life. But Matt, who was attached to South by Southwest, must have seen it somewhere.
Yes.
He picked it up. And what did he do with it?
At the time, he had a blog at the website IndieWire. And there were a few other people that had blogs, but he had, posted this and had some nice things to say about it. And, and it kind of caught on and circulated in the blog community, which, blogs were a big thing in the late 2000s, and that's not really a thing anymore. So
It's not?
well, I mean, I guess that Substack, that's kind of a blog, I guess you could say. And I have a couple of Substacks, and I can certainly get into that later.
Okay. So how did Mumblecore save your life?
Oh, well, I think it was kind of like, I mean, I was being a little facetious
Oh,
maybe, but I
sure.
think the idea was, maybe there was a place for me,
Hmm.
to be able to make a movie like that for a really low budget. But with the income I had, it still kind of seemed out of reach at that point, you know, and, you know, I got to meet a lot of very cool people. That subgenre sort of birthed the careers of like Greta Gerwig, Lena Dunham, Barry Jenkins, and the Safdie brothers, who now, have done their own, have gone their separate ways and have done their own individual movies. And I remember seeing Greta Gerwig, and I think my biggest regret was not introducing myself to her because I have not seen her since.
Oh. So when you say Mumblecore saved my life, of course you're being humorous, but the fact that you were participating and you were meeting people and you were networking, which is what you have to do if you're going to try to be in, as you called it, show business, right? It's all
Right.
about who you know, what you know, when you know it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you did meet a lot of people at the South by Southwest Film Festival when you began to go there. You made connections and got to interview a lot of filmmakers, which is great. But before we talk about that, I just don't want to forget to ask you, when you made this documentary about Binghamton, how did you go about doing that? I mean, it's not like you had hundreds of thousands of dollars at your disposal. What was your approach given the limitations that you had to deal with?
For graduation, college graduation, I had received just this old camcorder, and I was able to get some people through this organization in Binghamton called the Creative Community Consortium. And I ended up having a couple of people who were working at WICZ, the Fox affiliate in Binghamton, do some of the camera work. So
Oh,
that was kind of interesting and fun.
and what about the editing? I mean, you didn't have
So
like
I
an,
did that at home, or I was living in Ithaca at that time, and I had edited on Premiere Pro.
I don't know Premiere Pro, but
It's
I
similar
guess,
to Final Cut Pro.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do things out there, but a lot of people just don't know about them, right?
Right.
And what I think is so interesting about your story is that you may not be a household name, Erin, but you've actually done a lot of things. And the fact that you made films, albeit small ones, but still you made it, I think it's fantastic. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. And then you're living your life too, because no one could say you weren't trying to make something happen in film. But then in 2008, you had these very real life situations. Your parents' marriage broke up.
Yeah.
And then in 2013, your very best friend died suddenly. And let's face it, you were really young then. That is a
Yeah.
very, you're at an age where you're not usually faced with something like that. And I was wondering, how did you deal with all that?
It was really overwhelming because at the time my friend passed away, I was unemployed. So it's sort of like I was grieving and having to find work at the same time. And then I landed in retail. But the thing about corporate retail is that, you're constantly chasing hours. So film ended up kind of falling by the wayside.
Yeah.
And what I actually ended up starting to do was write freelance, mainly about the Finger Lakes wine industry. Um, my first article was about a brewery that was opening up in Geneva that's still open called Lake Drum Brewing. And that ran at Edible Finger Lakes back in 2014. And I, wrote for Edible Finger Lakes until it folded. I wrote for the Finger Lakes Wine Gazette. Since 2017, I've written for 585. And currently, I'm actually writing with 585. I tend to write more about like movies and music and, famous people from Rochester and stuff like that.
So what you're telling me, in other words, is you're the kind of person you just persevere no matter what is happening in your personal life. You used your talents to probably keep your head above water emotionally, and you just kept on keeping on, as the saying goes. I applaud you for that. I think that's really fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
So we're going to take a break here, and then we'll be back. But before we go, I just want to repeat that your story isn't dissimilar to a lot of people who are trying to make a career in the arts. And there's tons of frustration. There's so much rejection. And there's real life situations that you have to deal with. And the thing we haven't mentioned is, in the case of young people finding their way through COVID, that's a whole other level that you have to deal with. It's a brand new struggle. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to hear more of your journey. Welcome back to Catskill Character. And if you've just joined us, I've been speaking with Erin Scherer, host of Eating Upstate on Radio Catskill. And also, along with two others, Scott Parker and Paul Detmer, she hosts Keep the Dream Flowing, a podcast devoted to the 1969 Woodstock Music and Arts Festival. In the first half of the show, Erin told us about her journey from Penang, New York, which at the time the population was 5,000, her college days at SUNY Oneonta, and the various day jobs she's had while pursuing her dream of making films. In the second half of the show, we'll get into her show, Eating Upstate, and the podcast, Keep the Dream Flowing, and her experience with her improv teacher, Jeff Hiller, of Somebody Somewhere.
Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, Erin, you started traveling over to the Catskills during COVID. What got that started?
At the time, I had been working on a book about the Finger Lakes wine industry. I decided that I wanted to interview Eminence Road Winery, based out of Long Eddy in Delaware County near the Sullivan County border. They make wine using Finger Lakes grapes, which I thought was really interesting. They're kind of a commuter winery. 2 days before my 39th birthday, I was laid off from my job, but this was also when they were still doing the bonus payments. So I was able to get unemployment and then have that at the same time, which allowed me to travel to the Catskills. So in August of 2020, I booked an Airbnb just outside of Callicoon and traveled to Sullivan County and met them, interviewed them, spent a couple of days traveling to all these wonderful little towns in Sullivan County, got a chance to see the Bethel Woods Museum, and I wanted to come back. So
I understand that completely, but we do have to add, but probably one of the most important things that happened to you when you were traveling down to the Catskills is you started listening to WJFF Radio Catskill.
yes, that is the very important thing here. I always have enjoyed NPR. What got me interested in WJFF was that the station had volunteer opportunities. I had done radio back in college. I knew that there were these restaurants that were starting to pop up in the area. The media that exists here doesn't cover restaurants or beverage establishments very much. And so I kind of thought maybe I have something to bring to this. So I reached out to Tim Bruno and I started doing interviews in August of 2021. And the first segment aired the week before Christmas in 2021.
What's your strategy? Do you have a boundary? You don't go beyond this area, or are you also trying to tell the listeners down here what's going on further upstate?
I usually try to keep it either within the WJFF listening area or places that are maybe a short drive from the WJFF listening area. If you're wondering how I end up choosing things, I'll read about certain establishments getting a lot of traction and acclaim. Sometimes Tim Bruno will run a few things by me and I'll take suggestions from that. Early on, I used the website Eater, and there was a columnist by the name of Robert Sietsma who used to go up to the Catskills from New York City once a year and sort of find what he called a Hickster restaurant. And I've covered Brushland Eating House, which was one of the winners. Last year I did Phoenicia Diner,
Oh, yeah.
which was featured on Severance.
Well, one of my favorite restaurants up here is the Heron. That's in ours.
I have not visited them yet.
Oh my God.
I know they've been around quite a while.
They have, and they're fabulous. The thing about your show is you don't have a set time, right? Because
No.
your show airs on Radio Catskill.
Yeah, and it's, whenever Tim and Jason are able to fit me in.
And it's hard to build a following like that.
Yeah. I'm okay with that. I do a lot of things, so I don't always
Yeah.
put it out with regularity. I'm hoping to do a little bit more this year.
Now, as a restaurant reviewer, when you go into a restaurant, are you wearing a disguise? Do people know what you look like? Are they going to come out with, their best stuff because they know you're there?
I don't wear any disguises. I just wear my normal clothes and go in there, order what's interesting to me. Usually I don't introduce myself until I've done the segment. I don't announce, hey, I'm Erin from Eating Upstate. I go in as a customer. And, if it fits what I see as the Eating Upstate paradigm, I'm happy to cover them. There are times where I've gone in, researched, and then it's just kind of not really for this program. So it's not always feasible, but I do try to visit the establishment first. There have been a couple of instances where I have interviewed the owner before it opened. La Sagonie, which is in Narrowsburg, and the North Branch Inn when Jake, the current owner, took it over.
Yeah, that's a great place. Well, keeping with the food theme, you've also written for Edible Finger Lakes. I think you mentioned that. And you've been trying to write a book about the Finger Lakes wine industry. Tell us about that.
Like I said, this is kind of how I ended up coming to the Catskills. I basically started this long journey in 2018. I was in the process of changing jobs and I came across this thing on Catapult on how to pitch an agent. Years ago, there had been a book by a radio personality himself. His name is Evan Dawson, and he hosts a show on WXXI in Rochester called Connections. And the name of the book is Summer in a Glass. And it's about the Finger Lakes wine industry up until about 2011 when the book was published. And it tells these very in-depth stories about, the winemakers that kind of made the Finger Lakes, like Dr. Frank's, Ravines, Fox Run. And then there's also this, at the time, a much younger winery called Heart and Hands, which I thought was very interesting. And so the initial idea was wanting to do something that was a little bit of an update of that book. So I, sort of took this self-paced course on how to pitch an agent. And then later, I took another course on how to write a book proposal. And the project has kind of, it's been a little never ending, and it's kind of evolved. And, the publishing industry has changed a lot in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yes.
So I've, kind of like very likely, if it does end up being published, it's going to be self-published. But I have been putting up some chapters on one of my Substacks. I have a Substack dedicated to that. So, and hopefully I will finish it one day and publish it as a book.
Keep at it. I think it's a
Well,
great
thank you.
idea. I like it. You also have a blog. God, I could just go on and on. It's called Erin in Transit, which I think is a great title. And you wrote an article called Dreams Don't Have Deadlines. When I read that your improv teacher was Jeff Hiller, like I said before, I couldn't believe it. He's a comic genius. He recently received an Emmy, I think, for Best Supporting
Yes.
Actor, right? In 2025
Yep.
for Somebody Somewhere. What was it like working with him?
He was definitely a character. I remember the very first day he had us introduce ourselves and asked, "What celebrity do you resemble?" And he said, "I looked like Jonathan Lipnicki." And other people introduced themselves and talked about what celebrity they looked like. And when I introduced myself, I said, "I've never really been told I look like a celebrity, but I've been told I sound like Weird Al Yankovic." And it wasn't, and the person who said that, it was a compliment. Subsequent to that, I know somebody once said that they saw an episode of Louie with Gabby Hoffman and they thought it was me for a second there.
So what was his reaction?
To the Weird Al, I think he found it pretty funny, I guess. Yeah.
Where were you taking this improv course?
I was taking it at Upright Citizens Brigade in
Oh,
New York City. Yep.
wow.
And he also taught Alana Glazer and Abby Jacobson from Broad City. So I think if you read his book, he basically was about to quit show business altogether, having taught all these people that have moved on to become famous. And, he's still kind of struggling himself. And then he got Somebody Somewhere and won an Emmy. And I was really pleased for him. It's one thing to see somebody like Lena Dunham come up. It's another thing to see somebody like Jeff, who became famous in his 40s.
Yes. We have one more thing to talk about, and that's your podcast, Keep the Dream Flowing.
Yes. Basically, when summer and fall turned to winter in 2020, I wanted to return, but obviously I didn't want to be traveling. Winter here can be pretty touch and go. And so I kind of wanted to keep the vibe alive, so to speak. I looked up Woodstock 1969 in Apple Podcast and came across this podcast called Keep the Dream Flowing. And the first episode I listened to was an interview with Wavy Gravy. And then I ended up subscribing to the podcast. And then I, spoke to Tim Bruno about it. And he allowed me to do a segment on the podcast. So I interviewed them and ended up joining the podcast. So, and during my time on that show, I've interviewed members of Sha Na Na, the folk singer Melanie, a relatively short time before she passed away. Yeah, and some members of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And I've brought on a couple of authors. One is Peter Connors, who's written extensively about the Grateful Dead. And then the other is Stephen Lewis, who published a biography of Richard Manuel, of the band. And then, of course, you, Donna Fellenberg.
Yeah, I can't figure out how I got into that crowd, but thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. It's a great podcast. Erin, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. There's so many more things that we could talk about, but unfortunately, time is short. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, same. You are a fantastic host.
Oh, thank you, Erin. So I hope you keep your dreams alive. Keep on keeping on.
Thank you. I'm flattered.
You've been listening to Catskill Character with me, your host, Donna Fellenberg. And my guest today, Erin Scherer, writer, podcaster, restaurant reviewer, and hopefully one day a household name as a filmmaker. Erin's contact information is the following. Her Insta is at
Erin M. Scherer.
Erin M. Scherer. And also, we just talked about Keep the Dream Flowing. That's on Apple, Audible, and Spotify, yeah. On YouTube, you can find Eating Upstate, and you have a Substack, erinscherer.substack.com. Catskill Character is on every Saturday at 10:30, except the last Saturday of the month, when Greg Triggs brings us Travels with Triggs. Join us then for more fascinating tales from fabulous characters of the Catskills. I'm Donna Fellenberg, host of Catskill Character, here on Radio Catskill. Thanks for listening.